Jerome Washington, CEO of Washington Technologies, sits stunned in first class as champagne drips down his custom suit. Flight attendant Victoria stands frozen. A white woman smirks, saying your kind belongs in coach. His phone rings bored. Members are calling about the acquisition deal. Before we dive into this shocking encounter, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about triumph over discrimination. Now, let's rewind to understand how Jerome Washington found himself in this high-stakes confrontation. At 30,000 feet, Jerome Washington grew up in one of the roughest neighborhoods in South Chicago, where dreams often died before they could take root. In a cramped two-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and unreliable heating, Jerome and his mother Elaine carved out an existence built on determination and sacrifice. Elaine Washington worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a local diner, afternoon cleaning at a downtown office building, and weekend receptionist work at a budget motel. Despite her exhaustion, she never failed to check Jerome's homework or attend his school conferences. "Education is the only thing they can't take from you," she would tell him, her eyes tired but fierce with conviction. "You study twice as hard because you'll have to be twice as good." Jerome took those words to heart. While other kids played basketball after school, he stayed in the library until closing. When gangs tried to recruit him, he politely declined and took different routes home. His academic performance caught the attention of his high school counselor, Mrs. Daniels, who pushed him to apply for scholarships. "You have something special, Jerome," she told him, sliding college brochures across her desk. "Don't let this neighborhood define your future." When the Northwestern University acceptance letter arrived with a full academic scholarship, Elaine cried for the first time Jerome could remember. She framed the letter and hung it in their living room, a testament to what her son had accomplished. Against impossible odds, college presented its own challenges. Jerome felt the sting of being one of only 7 black students in his computer science program. Study groups mysteriously had no more room when he asked to join. Professors seemed surprised by his articulate presentations, offering backhanded compliments like, "You're not what I expected," rather than break him. These experiences forged Jerome's resolve. He graduated summa cum laude and turned down prestigious job offers to pursue his own vision. In his small apartment with secondhand furniture, Jerome and his college friend Tyler Green launched Washington Technologies, a software company focused on security solutions. "We have $50 in our business account," Tyler joked on their first day. Nowhere to go but up. Those early years tested everything Jerome had. Potential investors would schedule meetings based on his impressive resume, then grow visibly uncomfortable when he walked in. One venture capitalist bluntly asked if the actual founder would be joining them. Another suggested he might be more suited to sales than leadership. Washington Technologies survived on small contracts and Jerome's relentless perseverance. He worked 18-hour days, perfecting their security software while cold calling potential clients. Their breakthrough came when a mid-sized bank gave them a chance after 3 larger companies couldn't solve their security vulnerabilities. Success didn't shield Jerome from prejudice. As Washington Technologies grew from 2 employees to 20, then 200, the incidents just became more sophisticated. Jerome was mistaken for janitorial staff at his own company holiday party. Security guards followed him around industry conferences. At his own headquarters, visitors would ask to speak to whoever's in charge while standing right in front of him. 15 years of strategic growth transformed Washington Technologies into an industry leader. With over 500 employees and offices in 3 cities, Jerome maintained majority ownership, declining acquisition offers that would have made him wealthy but surrendered his vision. His reputation for integrity and innovation made Washington Technologies a coveted partner for larger corporations seeking to update their security infrastructure. The call from Thomson Industries came on a Tuesday afternoon. William Thomson's company was a giant in the industry, and they wanted to discuss acquiring certain divisions of Washington Technologies while entering a strategic partnership that would keep Jerome at the helm of his creation. This could take U.S. Global, Sandra Chen, Jerome's coup, said after the call, everything we've built scaled to international markets overnight. The numbers were staggering 9 figures, with significant equity in the combined entity. But Jerome's thoughts went to the community center. His company had built in his old South Chicago neighborhood the scholarship program for minority students in STEM and the coding boot camps they sponsored in underserved communities. If we do this, all our community initiatives get multiplied tenfold, he told Sandra. We could make a real difference. The meeting was set for Thursday in San Francisco. Jerome packed meticulously the night before his presentation materials, the market analysis showing the synergistic potential, and most importantly, the lucky blue tie his mother had given him when he landed their first major client. This tie has seen every important moment in this company's history, he told Sandra during their preparation session. It hasn't failed me yet. Thursday morning, Jerome arrived at O'Hare International Airport 3 hours early, his standard practice for important trips. He moved through security with the practiced efficiency of a frequent traveler, nodding politely at the TSA agent who examined his ID with unnecessary scrutiny. At the gate, he reviewed his presentation one last time before boarding began. When first class was called, Jerome gathered his leather portfolio and carry-on, joining the short line. He could feel the subtle looks from other passengers, the quick glances, the slight double takes that had become so familiar he barely registered them consciously anymore. He handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, who smiled professionally. As she scanned it, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Washington," she said, returning his boarding pass. Jerome nodded and walked down the jetway, mentally preparing for one of the most important meetings of his career, completely unaware of the confrontation awaiting him on the other side of the aircraft door. Jerome settled into seat 2A, placing his leather portfolio on the empty seat beside him. The first-class cabin smelled of subtle leather and fresh coffee as other passengers gradually filed in. Jerome retrieved his tablet, opening the acquisition documents to review the terms one last time before the meeting. The familiarity of numbers and legal language helped center his thoughts. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." Jerome looked up to see a middle-aged white woman with immaculately styled blonde hair, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and an expression of absolute certainty. He glanced at his boarding pass to confirm. "I'm in A," Jerome replied politely, showing her his boarding pass. "This is my assigned seat." Karen Miller, though Jerome wouldn't learn her name until later, tightened her lips into a thin line. She wore the kind of expensive casual outfit that took considerable money to look so effortless, with a diamond tennis bracelet catching the cabin lights as she gestured dramatically. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, louder now. "I always sit in the first row when I fly with my husband. We're frequent flyers with platinum status." Jerome maintained his professional smile, the one he'd perfected in countless uncomfortable business situations. "Perhaps your seat is to be? That's right next to me." "I need to speak with a flight attendant," Karen announced, ignoring his suggestion, and looking around imperiously. Victoria, a flight attendant with a warm smile and professional demeanor, approached them immediately. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Karen said before Jerome could speak. "There's been a seating mix-up. I need to verify this gentleman's boarding pass." The implication was clear, and Jerome felt the familiar weight of assumption settling on his shoulders. Victoria's eyes flicked to him apologetically before she extended her hand. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Jerome handed it over without comment, aware that other first-class passengers were now watching the interaction. Victoria checked the pass and nodded. "Mr. Washington is correctly seated into A. Ma'am, your seat is 3C, just one row back." Karen's face flushed slightly. "That can't be right. Check again." "My husband and I always sit in the front row. I've confirmed the assignment in our system," Victoria explained patiently. "Seat 3C is a window seat, very comfortable as well." "This is unacceptable," Karen declared. "I need to speak with your supervisor." As Victoria went to retrieve the lead flight attendant, Jerome returned to his documents, attempting to refocus on the Thompson Industries deal. He could feel Karen hovering nearby, her presence a deliberate intrusion into his space. The lead flight attendant, Michael arrived moments later. "Ma'am, I understand there's a seating concern," Michael asked. Karen launched into an elaborate explanation about her frequent flyer status and how there must have been a terrible mistake with the seating assignments. She spoke as if Jerome weren't present, gesturing toward his seat while avoiding looking directly at him. "I've checked our system," Michael confirmed after listening patiently. "The assignments are correct. Mr. Washington is in his assigned seat, and yours is 3C. Several other first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to be absorbed in magazines or phones, others watching with undisguised interest. A distinguished older gentleman across the aisle caught Jerome's eye and gave a small shake of his head, clearly embarrassed by Karen's behavior. "Let me make some calls," Karen announced, pulling out her phone. "My husband plays golf with your airline's regional director." As she stepped away to make her call, Michael turned to Jerome. "I apologize for the disruption, Mr. Washington. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "I'm fine, thank you," Jerome replied quietly. Karen returned minutes later, her expression even more pinched. She addressed Michael while pointing at Jerome. "I've been a loyal customer for 15 years. Surely you can arrange something. Perhaps he wouldn't mind moving to another seat." The assumption that Jerome would or should accommodate her entitlement hung in the air. Michael maintained his professional composure. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't ask other passengers to change their assigned seats without their agreement. First class is fully booked today." A voice came over the intercom announcing a 30-minute delay due to air traffic control, and Jerome felt a spike of anxiety. His meeting with Thomson Industries was tightly scheduled, and delays could compress his preparation time upon arrival. Karen finally moved toward her assigned seat in row 3, but not before loudly stating, "This is ridiculous. I've never been treated this way." As she settled in, Jerome could feel her glaring at the back of his head. He took a deep breath and returned to his documents, making a note to allow extra time for travel disruptions in the future. The tension in the cabin remained palpable as other passengers boarded, many sensing the undercurrent of hostility emanating from row 3. Victoria approached with a sympathetic smile. "We should be pushing back from the gate soon, Mr. Washington. Can I get you a beverage while we wait?" "Just water, thank you," Jerome replied. From behind him, Karen's voice carried deliberately, "I'll need a champagne. Make it a double. This flight is already stressful enough." Jerome heard the passenger next to Karen murmur something, and her sharp response, "Well, there are certain expectations about first class, don't you think? Standards should be maintained." The implication was impossible to miss. Jerome closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. He'd encountered this brand of behavior throughout his career. People who wouldn't explicitly mention race, but would talk about standards and expectations. While looking directly at him, the captain announced, "Another delay, this time for a maintenance check," and Jerome heard Karen's exasperated sigh behind him. He checked his watch, calculating how this would impact his arrival timeline. The Thomson Industries meeting represented years of work and sacrifice, and he wouldn't let this encounter derail his focus. "This is absolutely the last time I fly with this airline," Karen announced to no one in particular. "The service has gone completely downhill." Jerome kept his eyes on his tablet, reviewing profit projections and integration timelines. As the plane remained at the gate, some battles weren't worth fighting, and he had much bigger objectives ahead of him today. The cabin crew began drink service while the plane remained at the gate, a gesture to compensate for the continued delay. Victoria moved efficiently through the first-class cabin, her professional smile never wavering despite the tense atmosphere that had developed. "Would you care for a pre-flight beverage, Mr. Washington?" Victoria asked, stopping beside his seat with a tray of champagne flutes. "No, thank you," Jerome replied. "I need to stay focused for my meeting." Victoria nodded and continued to the next row. "Champagne, ma'am," she offered to Karen. "Finally, some proper service," Karen remarked loudly, taking a flute. "I was beginning to wonder if standards had completely disappeared." The passenger seated beside Karen, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes, shifted uncomfortably at her comment. Jerome could see their reflection in the window and noticed the man's embarrassed expression. Jerome returned his attention to his tablet, making final annotations on the acquisition proposal. The Thomson Industries deal would transform Washington Technologies from a national success to a global enterprise. The numbers were impressive: a 9-figure acquisition, with Jerome retaining leadership and implementing his vision on a much larger scale. More importantly, it would allow him to expand the educational initiatives in underserved communities. That had become the heart of his company's mission. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling? Comment number 1. If you believe airlines should have stricter policies against harassment. Or number 2, if you think the current procedures are adequate. Like and subscribe to join our community that stands against injustice. What do you think will happen next in this high-tension situation at 30,000 feet? A sudden commotion behind him interrupted Jerome's thoughts. He heard Karen's voice rise sharply. "Excuse me, be careful with that drink," she exclaimed to someone. Jerome glanced up just as he felt something cold splash across his shoulder and chest. The champagne seemed to move in slow motion as it cascaded down his custom navy suit, soaking into the fabric and splashing onto his tablet and the acquisition documents. Spread across his tray table. For a moment, the entire cabin froze. Victoria stood with her mouth slightly open, her hands suspended in midair. The elderly gentleman beside Karen had half risen from his seat, and Karen herself wore an expression that shifted rapidly from surprise to something that looked uncomfortably like satisfaction. "Oh my goodness," Karen exclaimed, her tone performative. "What a terrible accident." Jerome sat perfectly still, champagne dripping from his collar onto his lucky blue tie, the one his mother had given him for important meetings. The cold liquid seeped through his shirt, but the chill against his skin was nothing compared to the ice in his veins. Victoria sprang into action. "Sir, I am so terribly sorry," she gasped, grabbing cocktail napkins and passing them to Jerome. "Let me get more towels immediately." As Jerome carefully lifted his now damp tablet, Karen's voice cut through the commotion. "These things happen when the cabin is so crowded. Perhaps if the seating arrangements had been proper, this wouldn't have occurred." The implication hung in the air, impossible to miss. Jerome looked up and met Karen's eyes directly for the first time. There was no remorse there, only a cold challenge. He'd seen that look before in college classrooms when he'd earned the highest grade, in boardrooms when he'd outperformed expectations, in elevators when he'd mentioned he owned the company. "It was clearly an accident," Karen continued, her voice syrupy with fake concern while her eyes remained hard. "Though perhaps this section of the plane isn't what you're accustomed to. The movements of the aircraft can be surprising if you're not a regular in first class." The elderly gentleman beside her looked mortified. "Ma'am, that's completely inappropriate. I'm simply stating facts," Karen cut him off. "Some people might be more comfortable in other sections of the plane." Victoria returned with a handful of towels and a stain removal wipe. "Mr. Washington, I cannot apologize enough. If you'd like to use the lavatory to clean up, I can watch your belongings." Jerome nodded, carefully gathering his damp documents. The acquisition papers' hours of work by his legal team now had spreading champagne stains across crucial sections. His white shirt was visibly soaked beneath his jacket, and his lucky tie bore a spreading pale stain. "Thank you, Victoria," he said quietly, maintaining his composure through practiced discipline. As Jerome stood, his phone began to ring. The screen displayed Sandra Chen Koo, his second-in-command, who was coordinating with the Thomson Industries team in San Francisco. This call would be about last-minute details for the meeting, details he now needed to handle while dripping with champagne in an airplane lavatory. What would you do if you were in Jerome's position? Comment. Number 1, if you think he should confront Karen directly. Or number 2, if maintaining professional composure is the better approach. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience in the face of discrimination. How will Jerome handle this situation while still focusing on his crucial business meeting? Jerome felt every eye in first class on him as he made his way to the lavatory, phone still ringing in his hand. The whispers began immediately, some sympathetic, others curious. He closed the lavatory door behind him and looked at his reflection in the mirror, a successful CEO, about to close the biggest deal of his career, champagne staining his carefully chosen suit. His phone rang again. Sandra would be concerned. About his silence, Jerome took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and answered the call, already formulating how he would handle the situation when he returned to his seat. In the cramped airplane lavatory, Jerome dabbed at his soaked shirt with paper towels. Phone pressed between his ear and shoulder. "Sandra, I'm going to need you to email me another copy of the presentation. There's been an incident." He kept his voice level, not revealing the humiliation burning in his chest. "Everything okay, Jerome?" Sandra asked, concern evident in her voice. "Just a spill. I'll handle it," he replied. The practiced response of a man who had been handling incidents his entire career. As he worked on the stain, Jerome's mind flashed back to his sophomore year at Northwestern. He'd been the only black student in advanced algorithm design, and during midterms, a classmate had accidentally knocked coffee onto his completed exam. The professor had shrugged it off, "These things happen," and made Jerome retake the test alone the following day. He'd stayed silent then, focused solely on maintaining his scholarship. His thoughts shifted to Professor Winters, his graduate advisor and eventual mentor, after Jerome had been passed over for a research opportunity. Despite having the highest qualifications, Winters had pulled him aside. "There are moments to stay quiet and moments to speak up," Winters had told him. "The trick is knowing which is which, but more importantly, know how to use your voice when you do speak up. Strategy matters as much as substance." Jerome straightened, his tie still damp but no longer dripping, and looked at himself in the mirror. He was no longer that scholarship student desperate to avoid conflict. He was Jerome Washington, CEO of Washington Technologies, on the verge of a 9-figure acquisition deal. This was not a moment to stay quiet. He returned to his seat with measured steps and calm determination. Victoria immediately approached. "Mr. Washington, I've spoken with the captain about the incident. We're deeply sorry, thank you." "Victoria," Jerome interrupted gently, "I appreciate your concern. Could you note the incident in your report? I'll be following up with the airline after we land." Victoria nodded, relief and respect mingling in her expression. "Of course, sir." Jerome settled back into his seat, aware that Karen had moved herself to an empty seat across the aisle, as far from him as possible while remaining in first class. She was now loudly complaining to another flight attendant about the declining standards on the airline. He pulled out his phone and opened the camera app, subtly angling it to capture Karen's continuing disruptive behavior. Professor Winters' words echoed in his mind. Strategy matters as much as substance. The distinguished older gentleman who had been seated near Karen approached Jerome's row. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I saw what happened. Completely unacceptable. If you need a witness to that incident, I'd be happy to provide my information." Jerome thanked him sincerely, accepting his business card. Other passengers began making similar gestures, a nod, a sympathetic smile, a quiet word of support. The energy in the cabin was shifting, the collective discomfort with Karen's behavior crystallizing into solidarity. Victoria returned with a fresh napkin for Jerome's tray table. "Several passengers have approached me about what happened," she whispered. "The crew is documenting everything." Jerome nodded his thanks, maintaining his professional demeanor while continuing to review his now digital documents on his tablet, the champagne-soaked papers carefully stored in his portfolio. His phone vibrated with a text from Sandra. "Just got word Thompson himself is on your flight. First class. Wanted to surprise you before the meeting." Jerome froze, scanning the first-class cabin discreetly. William Thompson, CEO of Thompson Industries, was on this flight. Had he witnessed the entire incident? Another text from Sandra arrived. "Older gentleman. Gray hair, blue suit. Usually sits in back of first class. Likes to observe people without being noticed." Jerome's mind raced through the passengers he'd seen. The distinguished older man who had offered to be a witness. The one who had been sitting near Karen before she moved. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with another message from Sandra. "Also, Miller Banking is one of the financing partners for the deal. CEO is Richard Miller. Might be relevant." A cold realization washed over Jerome. Miller Banking. Could Karen be connected to Richard Miller? The coincidence seemed too great. Just then, Karen stood up again, making another scene about needing to use the lavatory at the front of the cabin. Though there was one in the rear of first class closer to her new seat, she deliberately walked past Jerome, making a show of giving his seat a wide berth, as if he were somehow contaminated. "I certainly hope the rest of this flight improves," she announced to no one. "In particular, some of us have important connections waiting in San Francisco." Jerome remained focused on his tablet, but he was now recording audio on his phone, documenting each interaction. Professor Winters had taught him another valuable lesson: evidence matters. The power dynamic was shifting subtly but unmistakably. What had begun as an isolated incident of prejudice was evolving into something more complex, a situation where Jerome held more cards than Karen realized. If William Thompson was indeed on this flight and had witnessed her behavior, and if she was connected to Richard Miller of Miller Banking, Jerome allowed himself a small smile as he continued reviewing the acquisition documents. Sometimes, the most powerful move was patience. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing they were third in line for takeoff. Jerome closed his tablet, having finalized his review of the acquisition materials despite the circumstances. He glanced around the first-class cabin, trying to identify William Thompson among the passengers. Could it really be the distinguished older gentleman who had offered his support? Jerome didn't have to wonder long. A tall man in his 60s with silver hair and a tailored blue suit rose from his seat in the last row of first class and made his way forward. He had observant eyes that seemed to miss nothing and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Excuse me," he said, stopping beside Jerome's row. "You're Jerome Washington, aren't you? Of Washington Technologies?" Jerome stood to shake his hand. "Yes, sir. And you must be William Thompson." Thompson smiled, his grip firm. "Guilty as charged. I was planning to surprise you in San Francisco, but it seems we're flight mates." His eyes flicked briefly to Jerome's champagne-stained tie. "Though it appears you've had an eventful journey already." From across the aisle, Karen's head snapped up at the mention of Thompson's name. Jerome noticed her sudden attention, the calculating reassessment in her eyes. "Nothing I can't handle," Jerome replied diplomatically. "It's a pleasure to meet you before our formal meeting." "Mr. Thompson." "Please, call me William," Thompson said, then lowered his voice. "I observed that unfortunate incident earlier. Completely unacceptable behavior." Karen was now openly watching them, her expression shifting from dismissive to increasingly concerned. As she realized who Thompson was, "I appreciate your saying so," Jerome responded. Thompson gestured to the empty seat beside Jerome. "Mind if I join you for a moment? Might as well get a head start on our discussion." "Please," Jerome said, moving his portfolio to make room. As Thompson settled in, Karen suddenly appeared beside them, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the entitled hostility, replaced by an artificial warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, what a wonderful coincidence," she gushed. "I'm Karen Miller. My husband Richard and I attended the technology investment gala you hosted last month." Thompson regarded her with cool politeness. "Mrs. Miller?" "Yes, I believe I recall meeting your husband." Karen beamed, clearly expecting Thompson to acknowledge her as a social equal. "Richard speaks so highly of you. He's very excited about potential partnerships between Miller Banking and Thompson Industries." Thompson's expression remained neutral. "Is that so? Interesting timing, as it happens. Jerome and I were just about to discuss the acquisition deal between Thompson Industries and Washington Technologies." Karen's smile faltered slightly. "Acquisition deal? Yes." Thompson continued. "Washington Technologies has developed security systems light years ahead of anything else on the market. We've been trying to partner with them for years." Jerome watched as Karen processed this information, her eyes darting between them with growing realization. "You two know each other?" she asked, her voice higher than before. Thompson chuckled. "Not as well as we should. I actually rejected Jerome's job application 15 years ago, one of the worst business decisions I ever made." He turned to Jerome with genuine respect. "You went on to build something remarkable on your own. Exactly what I told my board when I recommended this acquisition." Karen's complexion had paled considerably. "I had no idea Mr. Washington was connected to you." "More than connected," Thompson corrected. "Jerome's company is about to become our most valuable acquisition. Once the deal closes tomorrow, Washington Technology Security Division will be integrated throughout our global infrastructure." The implication hung in the air. If Thompson Industries was acquiring Washington Technologies, and Miller Banking was involved in financing the deal, Karen had just publicly harassed a key figure in a multi-million-dollar business transaction involving her husband's bank. How wonderful, Karen managed, her voice strained. Such an inspiring success story. Thompson turned back to Jerome, effectively dismissing Karen. "Since we have this unexpected time, shall we discuss some of the integration details? I'm particularly interested in how your community education initiatives might be expanded with our resources." "I'd like that," Jerome replied, pulling up the relevant documents on his tablet. Karen hovered awkwardly for a moment before retreating to her seat, her phone immediately in hand. Jerome could see her typing frantically, presumably messaging her husband about the situation, as Jerome and Thompson discussed the merger details. Their conversation turned to their shared past. "You probably don't remember this," Thompson said, "but you interviewed with me personally for that position years ago." "I remember," Jerome confirmed. "You told me my security protocol ideas were too ambitious for practical implementation." Thompson laughed. "And then you went and proved me completely wrong. That's why I tracked your company's development over the years. When your adaptive security framework outperformed everyone else in the industry, I knew we needed to either acquire you or compete against you." The former seemed much more sensible. Their conversation continued as the plane finally began taxiing for takeoff. Jerome found himself genuinely enjoying Thompson's company. He was insightful, forward-thinking, and showed none of the condescension Jerome often encountered in industry veterans. From the corner of his eye, Jerome noticed Karen ending a phone call, her expression now deeply concerned. She kept glancing in their direction, clearly overhearing fragments of their business discussion. The power dynamic had completely inverted. The woman who had treated him as an unwelcome intruder now realized he was a key business partner to both Thompson Industries and, by extension, her husband's bank. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Jerome felt a sense of vindication, not because of Karen's discomfort, but because his success spoke for itself. Years of dedication, innovation, and perseverance had brought him to this moment sitting as an equal with William Thompson, discussing a partnership that would transform his company's future. The champagne stain on his lucky tie seemed less significant now. Some stains were temporary. His achievements were permanent. The plane leveled at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dimming with a soft chime. Jerome and William Thompson continued their productive discussion about the acquisition, finding unexpected common ground on everything from technical integration to corporate culture. "Your emphasis on community involvement particularly impressed our board," Thompson said. "The coding academies in underserved neighborhoods align perfectly with our foundation's focus on educational equity." Jerome nodded. "Those initiatives aren't just charity, they're talent pipelines. Some of our most innovative developers came through those programs." Across the aisle, Karen Miller ended another phone call, her expression now distinctly anxious. She had been making continuous calls since takeoff, her voice growing increasingly strained. Jerome could hear fragments. "Richard, you don't understand. Yes, Washington Technologies. No, I didn't know who he was." Karen suddenly stood and approached their row, her earlier hostility replaced by a strained smile. She had applied fresh lipstick and straightened her designer blouse, preparing for a performance. "Mr. Washington," she began, her voice hunted with insincerity, "I want to apologize for the unfortunate champagne incident. These planes can be so turbulent, and accidents happen." Jerome regarded her silently, noting she had waited until Thompson stepped away to use the restroom before approaching. "Strategic timing. I feel just terrible about your suit," Karen continued when Jerome didn't immediately respond. "Please, allow me to cover the dry cleaning. My husband's company often works with executives like yourself, and we value professional relationships. Have you ever witnessed someone suddenly change their behavior when they realized who they were dealing with? Comment number 1 if you've experienced this kind of insincerity. Or number 2 if you believe people deserve second chances even after showing their true colors. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice in unexpected places. Do you think Jerome should accept Karen's apology or stand his ground? Jerome placed his tablet down carefully. Mrs. Miller, is it? Yes, Karen Miller, she confirmed eagerly. My husband is Richard Miller, CEO of Miller Banking. We're actually involved in several major technology financing deals in Silicon Valley. I'm aware of who your husband is, Jerome replied evenly. And I suspect you're now aware of who I am. Beyond just a black man who you believed didn't belong in first class. Karen's smile faltered. That's not what I never said anything about. You didn't have to say it explicitly. Jerome interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Your actions and implications were perfectly clear. From questioning my seat assignment to suggesting I might be more comfortable elsewhere. You've completely misunderstood. Karen protested, louder now. I never intended any offense. Several passengers looked up at her raised voice. Victoria, the flight attendant, paused in the aisle, watching the interaction carefully. Mrs. Miller. Jerome continued, maintaining his composure. I don't need your apology for the champagne. I need you to recognize that your behavior reflects a pattern of assumptions and prejudices that people like me face every day. Karen's diplomatic facade cracked. This is ridiculous. I've apologized for an accident. I'm trying to be gracious here, and you're turning this into something it's not. An accident. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Like when you said your kind belongs in coach. Karen's eyes widened. I never said that. You're making things up now. Several passengers heard you. Jerome replied, including, I believe, Mr. Thompson. As if on cue, William Thompson returned to his seat. Is everything all right here? Karen immediately shifted her demeanor again. William, Jerome and I were just clearing up that little misunderstanding from earlier. Thompson's expression remained neutral. I wouldn't call deliberate harassment a little misunderstanding, Mrs. Miller. Harassment? Karen's voice rose sharply. That's a very serious accusation. I'm simply trying to make amends for an accidental spill. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, causing Karen to grab the headrest for balance. The seatbelt sign illuminated with another chime. Ma'am, you need to return to your seat, Victoria said, approaching with professional firmness. In a moment, Karen snapped. This gentleman is making unfounded accusations against me. Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. An older woman across the aisle spoke up unexpectedly. I heard what you said to him before takeoff. She stated clearly, it was completely inappropriate. So did I, added a businessman from the row behind. Something about his kind belonging elsewhere. Karen's face flushed deep red. You're all twisting my words. I'm being ganged up on here. Mrs. Miller. Victoria said more firmly. The captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. You must return to your seat immediately. This is outrageous, Karen declared, her voice rising to a near shout. Do you know who my husband is? Richard Miller controls financing that your airline depends on. The lead flight attendant, Michael, appeared beside. Victoria, ma'am, this is your final warning. Return to your seat or we'll need to take further action. Karen pointed an accusatory finger at Jerome. He's the one causing problems. He's threatening me. Jerome remained seated, hands visible on his armrests, expression calm. I haven't moved from my seat or raised my voice, Mrs. Miller. You're trying to ruin my reputation. Karen's voice had reached a shrill pitch. You people always play the victim. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Karen's last statement had crossed a line so clearly that even she seemed momentarily shocked. By her own words, Michael's expression hardened. Mum, that language is unacceptable. Return to your seat immediately. This is reverse discrimination. Karen declared, refusing to move. I'm being persecuted for standing up for myself. He's using his position to intimidate me because I'm a woman. Thompson, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Mrs. Miller, as one of the few people here who holds a similar social and economic position to your husband, let me be clear. Mr. Washington has conducted himself with perfect professionalism. throughout this entire unfortunate incident. You have not. The captain's voice came over the intercom. This is your captain speaking. We've received reports of a disturbance in the cabin. If the situation is not resolved immediately, we will be forced to divert to the nearest airport. Flight attendants, please prepare for security measures if needed. Karen's face cycled through emotions: anger, fear, indignation before settling on righteous victimhood. Fine, I'll sit down. But this isn't over. My husband will hear about how I've been treated. As she finally returned to her seat, Jerome exchanged a glance with Thompson. Both men understood the situation had escalated beyond a personal confrontation. It now threatened their business relationship with Miller Banking, the acquisition deal, and potentially both their companies' reputations. What Jerome didn't yet realize was that another passenger had been quietly recording the entire confrontation on their phone, and the video was about to complicate matters even further. 20 minutes of tense silence followed Karen's return to her seat. Jerome and Thompson continued their discussion in lowered voices, both aware of the business implications of the incident. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with heightened alertness, Victoria checking on Jerome discreetly while Michael monitored Karen from a distance. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a situation in the cabin, we'll be returning to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. A collective groan rippled through the cabin. Jerome checked his watch. This delay would make his meeting timeline nearly impossible. Thompson seemed to read his thoughts. Don't worry about the meeting, Thompson assured him. We'll reschedule. The deal isn't going anywhere. From row 3, Karen's voice rose again. This is completely unnecessary. We can't go back. I have appointments in San Francisco. Michael approached her row. Ma'am, this decision comes directly from the captain. It's non-negotiable. This is his fault. Karen pointed at Jerome. He's manipulated this entire situation. Michael remained professionally detached. Ma'am, multiple passengers have reported your disruptive behavior. Please remain seated and calm, or we'll have additional measures upon landing. The plane began its descent back to Chicago, the mood in the cabin deteriorating further. Karen alternated between angry phone calls and loud complaints to anyone within earshot. Several passengers filmed discreetly on their phones. When the plane finally touched down and taxied to the gate, the captain made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated. Chicago Airport security will be boarding momentarily. Within minutes, 2 uniformed airport security officers entered the aircraft. They conferred briefly with the captain and Michael at the front of the plane before approaching Jerome's row. Mr. Washington, one officer asked, we understand there was an incident involving you. Before Jerome could respond, Karen stood up. Officers, finally, I want to file a complaint. This man has been harassing me and threatening me throughout the flight. The officers turned to her. Ma'am, please return to your seat. We'll speak with you momentarily. I will not sit down, Karen declared. I've been treated abominably on this flight, and now I'm being ignored by security. Do you know who I am? Jerome quietly unlocked his phone and pulled up the video he'd recorded earlier. Officers, I have documentation of the incidents that occurred. Would you like to review it? The security officers nodded, watching as Jerome played the video capturing Karen's earlier behavior, including her "your kind" comment and the deliberate champagne spill. William Thompson leaned forward. I witnessed these events personally. Officers, Mr. Washington has conducted himself with remarkable restraint throughout this ordeal. Victoria stepped forward. Our flight crew has documented multiple incidents of disruptive behavior from this passenger. She handed them a written report. The elderly gentleman who had offered his card to Jerome earlier raised his hand. I'd like to provide a statement as well. What I witnessed was clear harassment based on racial prejudice. Other passengers began voicing similar sentiments, many offering their contact information as witnesses. The tide of public opinion had turned definitively against Karen, who watched in growing alarm as her version of events crumbled. This is a conspiracy, she exclaimed. You're all ganging up on me because I dared to stand up for myself. The security officers exchanged glances before addressing Karen. Ma'am, Based on crew reports and witness statements, we're going to ask you to deplane and come with us. Karen's face paled. What? No, I'm not leaving this plane. I have critical business in San Francisco. You don't have a choice, ma'am. The officer stated firmly. Karen abruptly changed tactics. I'm feeling unwell. I think I'm having a panic attack. I need medical attention before I can move. She clutched at her chest dramatically. I have a heart condition. My medication is in San Francisco. The second officer spoke into his radio, requesting medical personnel. Karen smiled triumphantly, believing she'd found a way to delay her removal. Actually, said a woman seated across from Karen, I'm a cardiologist. I'd be happy to assess your condition while we wait for paramedics. Karen's performance faltered. That won't be necessary. I just need a moment to compose myself. Ma'am, the first officer said, you can either deplane voluntarily, or we will remove you with assistance. Those are your options. Karen looked around desperately, finding no allies among the passengers or crew. Even the business people who had remained neutral throughout now watched her with disapproval. This is outrageous, she declared, gathering her designer handbag. My husband's attorneys will have a field day with this. I'll sue the airline. I'll sue him. She pointed at Jerome, and I'll sue everyone who participated in this charade. As Karen was escorted toward the exit, she made one final attempt to salvage her dignity. Mr. Thompson, surely you understand my position here. One business leader to another. Thompson regarded her coolly. Mrs. Miller, in my 40 years in business, I've learned that character reveals itself under pressure. Today has been very educational. A smattering of applause broke out. As Karen was finally removed from the plane, the captain announced they would be refueling and departing again within the hour. A representative from the airline approached Jerome's seat. Mr. Washington, on behalf of the airline, I want to extend our deepest apologies for what you experienced today. We'd like to offer you compensation in the form of flight vouchers and status upgrades. Jerome considered the offer. Thank you, but I'd prefer the airline make a donation to the Washington Technologies Education Foundation instead. We provide technology training in underserved communities. The representative appeared surprised but nodded. That's a generous suggestion. I'll make sure it happens. As the remaining passengers settled back in for the delayed flight, many approached Jerome to express their support. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination, while others simply offered handshakes or words of encouragement. Victoria returned with a fresh coffee for Jerome. That was handled with remarkable grace, sir. Jerome smiled. My mother always said dignity can't be given or taken away, it's how you carry yourself that matters. As the plane finally took off again, now 90 minutes behind schedule, Jerome looked out the window at Chicago receding below them. The champagne stain on his lucky tie had dried to a faint outline, a reminder of the incident that would follow him to San Francisco and beyond, though in ways he couldn't yet imagine. At cruising altitude, Jerome and William Thompson resumed their discussion, now with a different energy. The shared experience had accelerated their relationship beyond typical business formalities. I've seen my share of uncomfortable situations. In first class, Thompson remarked, but nothing quite like that. Your composure was remarkable. Jerome nodded appreciatively. When you've been in enough of these situations, you develop a certain muscle memory for handling them. That's the tragedy of it, Thompson replied. The fact that you've had to develop that skill at all. Their conversation shifted to more personal territory. Thompson sharing stories of building his company in the 1980s, Jerome describing his mother's influence on his business ethics. The acquisition discussion evolved from contractual details to shared vision. Your security protocols are revolutionary, Thompson noted, but I'm equally impressed by your community initiatives. The coding academies in South Chicago and Detroit are exactly the kind of corporate responsibility I've tried to foster at Thompson Industries. Jerome smiled. Those programs aren't charity, they're talent pipelines. Some of my best developers came through them. As they spoke, Jerome's phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Are you okay? Someone posted a video of an incident on your flight. It's going viral. #FirstClassCEO is trending. Jerome stared at the message in disbelief. Someone had recorded the confrontation and shared it online. He quickly opened his browser and searched. The hashtag, finding thousands of results already populating. The top video, with over 100,000 views in just 40 minutes, clearly showed Karen spilling champagne on him and making her your kind comment. The footage continued through her harassment and eventual removal, capturing Jerome's composed responses throughout. Comments flooded in beneath the video. The patience of this man. I would have lost it. This is what black people deal with every day. Who is this CEO? His company deserves our support. Karen messed with the wrong executive. Hashtag first-class CEO. Jerome showed the phone to Thompson, who shook his head. Welcome to the digital age. How do you want to handle this? Before Jerome could answer, another text from Sandra arrived. Washington Technologies stock up 3.8% in unusual midday trading. Surge. Media requesting statements. How do you want to proceed? Jerome took a deep breath. What had begun as a personal incident was now transforming into something much larger. A public narrative that could impact his company, the acquisition, and potentially the broader conversation about race in corporate America. I need to be thoughtful about this, Jerome told Thompson. It's no longer just about what happened on this plane. Thompson nodded. Whatever approach you take, Thompson, industry stands with you. This doesn't change our deal, if anything. It reinforces why your leadership is exactly what we need. As Jerome considered his response strategy, his phone rang with an unknown number. He excused himself and answered cautiously. Is this Jerome Washington? A male voice asked, tension evident in his tone. Yes, who's calling? Richard Miller, Karen's husband. Jerome caught Thompson's eye, mouthing Miller silently. Thompson raised his eyebrows in surprise. Mr. Miller, Jerome acknowledged, keeping his voice neutral. This is unexpected. Look, I'm calling to apologize, Miller said, the words clearly difficult for him. Karen's behavior was inexcusable. I've seen the video. Jerome remained silent, letting the uncomfortable pause stretch. Our bank has a long relationship with Thompson Industries, Miller continued. This incident could jeopardize that, not to mention our potential involvement in your acquisition. Financing. I'm hoping we can resolve this privately. The subtext was clear. This was damage control, not genuine remorse. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Miller? Jerome asked. A private apology from Karen, a substantial donation to a charity of your choice, and discretion regarding our bank's involvement in the acquisition. Jerome considered the offer. Memories flooding back of all the times he'd been expected to quietly accept apologies after public humiliations. The scholarship committee that had accidentally lost his application. The real estate agent who had shown him only properties in certain neighborhoods. The security guards who followed him through his own company's building until his ID badge was visible. I appreciate the call, Mr. Miller, Jerome finally said, but I won't be handling this privately. Your wife's actions weren't private, and neither will be the consequences. He ended the call and turned to Thompson, who had clearly overheard the conversation. Miller Banking's involvement in the acquisition may become complicated, Jerome noted. Thompson shrugged. There are plenty of banks in the world, Jerome. Finding financing isn't the problem. Finding companies with your vision and integrity is. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Jerome's phone continued buzzing with notifications. The video had surpassed 1 million views. Washington Technologies stock was up nearly 5% now. News outlets were running the story, describing Jerome as a composed CEO facing blatant discrimination. Jerome gazed out the window at the approaching California coastline. When he'd boarded in Chicago, he'd been focused solely on the acquisition, the culmination of 15 years of work. Now, he was at the center of a viral moment that could reshape his public identity and his company's perception. Victoria approached. Their row will be landing shortly, Mr. Washington. There's something you should know. There are news crews at the airport. Apparently, the incident has gained significant attention. Jerome thanked her for the warning. In the reflection of the window, he could see other passengers sneaking glances at him, some clearly having recognized him from the viral video. The narrative was spiraling beyond his control, yet somehow, As the plane descended through the clouds, Jerome felt a surprising sense of clarity. Throughout his career, he'd carefully navigated around confrontation, focusing on excellence as his response to prejudice. Now, circumstances had thrust him into a position where silence wasn't an option. As the landing gear deployed with a mechanical whine, Jerome made his decision. He wouldn't hide from this moment. Instead, he would use it not just for himself, but for every person who had ever swallowed their dignity in the face of discrimination. The plane touched down on the San Francisco runway, and Jerome Washington prepared to step into his spotlight. He never saw it, but now recognized as an opportunity to drive change. 1 month later, Jerome Washington stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the San Francisco Fairmont Hotel, addressing the National Business Leadership Conference. 500 industry leaders watched attentively as his image was projected on massive screens. Throughout the room, leadership isn't just about quarterly results or market share, Jerome stated. His voice resonant and confident. It's about the standards we set, the cultures we create, and the examples we provide. True leadership means creating spaces where excellence is the only barrier to advancement, not race, not gender, not background. The audience erupted in applause. In the front row, Jerome's mother Elaine watched with tears in her eyes, seated beside William Thompson and Sandra Chen. The month following the airplane incident had transformed Jerome's life and career in ways he could never have anticipated. The viral video, now viewed over 50 million times, had catapulted him from respected industry figure to national symbol of dignity. In the face of discrimination, the acquisition between Washington Technologies and Thompson Industries had proceeded smoothly, though with one significant change. Miller Banking had been removed from the financing consortium. Richard Miller's frantic attempts to salvage the relationship had fallen flat, especially after Washington Technologies' legal team received evidence that Karen Miller had attempted to have the viral video removed from social media platforms through legal threats. The business press had covered the acquisition extensively, but equally focused on the character Jerome had displayed during the incident. Forbes featured him on their cover, with the headline "The Standard Bearer: How Jerome Washington is Changing Corporate America's Culture." The Washington Post ran an in-depth profile examining his journey from South Chicago to CEO, highlighting the systematic barriers he'd overcome. "The integration of our companies continues to exceed expectations," Jerome continued in his speech. "Our combined security solutions now protect 30% of Fortune 500 companies, and our educational initiatives have expanded to 12 cities nationwide." He paused, taking a sip of water. "But today, I want to focus on something more fundamental than business metrics. I want to talk about belonging." Jerome shared the story of his journey from the cramped apartment where his mother taught him that education is the one thing they can't take from you, through the scholarship at Northwestern to the founding of Washington Technologies. From his studio apartment, he spoke candidly about the barriers and prejudice he'd faced at each step. "The incident that many of you saw online was not unique," he explained. "What made it different wasn't the behavior I encountered, it was that, for once, there were consequences for that behavior." In the weeks following the flight, Karen Miller's identity had become public despite her husband's efforts to keep her name out of the press. She had resigned from 3 nonprofit boards after their donors threatened to withdraw support. Richard Miller had issued a public apology, announcing diversity initiatives at his bank alongside a substantial donation to organizations fighting discrimination. Victoria, the flight attendant who had stood firm during the incident, had been promoted to first-class supervisor and featured in the airline's new staff training videos about handling discrimination on board. She and Jerome remained in contact, with Washington Technologies offering technical support for the airline's updated customer service protocols. "Real change requires more than viral moments," Jerome continued. "It demands sustained commitment to creating environments where everyone belongs, not as guests or exceptions, but as full and equal participants." He outlined the new scholarship program established with part of the acquisition proceeds, the Elaine Washington Fund, named for his mother, which would provide full university scholarships and mentoring to students from underserved communities pursuing technology careers. My mother worked 3 jobs to give me opportunity, Jerome said, his voice momentarily thickening with emotion as he looked at Elaine. Not everyone has that advantage. This fund aims to level the playing field, even if just slightly. As Jerome concluded his speech to a standing ovation, he reflected on the unexpected journey of the past month. The champagne stain had been a temporary indignity. The response had created permanent change. Backstage, after embracing his mother and colleagues, Jerome checked his phone to find a message from an unexpected source, the elderly gentleman who had offered to be his witness on the flight. He had turned out to be a retired federal judge who now consulted on corporate ethics. "Watched your speech online," the message read. "Reminded me why justice matters. Even in small moments, the world needs more leaders like you, Jerome." Later that evening, as Jerome boarded another flight, this time to Detroit for the opening of their newest coding academy, something unexpected happened. As he walked through first class to his seat, a young flight attendant recognized him. "Mr. Washington," she said with a wide smile, "it's an honor to have you on board." Several other passengers looked up, recognition dawning on their faces. Then, spontaneously, one began to applaud, others joined in, until the entire first-class cabin was acknowledging him with respectful appreciation. Jerome nodded gratefully, humbled by the gesture. As he settled into his seat, he thought about his mother's words from so long ago. "Education is the one thing they can't take from you." She had been right, but incomplete. There were other things that couldn't be taken: dignity, integrity, and the power to transform difficult moments into meaningful change. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Jerome Washington looked out at the fading lights of San Francisco, ready for whatever came next. Jerome Washington's experience teaches us that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. Throughout his life, he faced discrimination with strategic patience and calculated responses rather than reactionary anger. This approach didn't just preserve his self-respect, it ultimately shifted power dynamics in his favor. When confronted with prejudice, Jerome documented evidence, built alliances, and maintained professionalism. He understood that the most effective response to discrimination isn't emotional outbursts, but methodical, dignified resistance. By choosing when and how to address injustice, he controlled the narrative. The story also highlights how privilege often blinds people to their own biases. Karen assumed her social position granted her immunity from consequences, never imagining Jerome could possess equal or greater influence. This reminds us that appearances never tell the complete story of someone's capabilities, connections, or character. Perhaps most importantly, Jerome used his platform not for personal vengeance, but to create systemic change through education and opportunity. He transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a movement for broader equity, proving that true leadership means leveraging success to dismantle the barriers that others still face. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you knew how to respond effectively? Or perhaps you've experienced it yourself and struggled with whether to speak up or stay silent. Jerome's story shows us there's power in strategic patience and documented evidence. Share in the comments a time when you witnessed prejudice and how you responded, or how you wish you had. Was there a moment when someone stood up for you when you needed it most? Your experiences might give someone else the courage they need today. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button for more powerful narratives about overcoming injustice. Like this video to help it reach others who need this message. And most importantly, share it with someone who might be facing their own first-class battle right now. Remember, change happens one conversation, one stand, one video at a time. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in dignity for all. Until next time, hold your head high and know your worth is never determined by how others treat you.